You know, one of the hats that I wear is chair of the Center for Humans and Nature. It's an amazing not-for-profit founded by Strawn Donnelly that occupies the space between the world of ideas and that of action and advocacy. The center looks at long-term implications of how society relates to and cares for the natural world, both from an ethical and a philosophical perspective. In fact, I encourage all of you to visit a powerful exhibition presently at the Peggy Notebart Nature Museum entitled City Creatures, a partnership between the Chicago Academy of Sciences and the Center for Humans and Nature. The University of Chicago Press has just published a wonderful book of the same name, produced by the center, that captures, through art and writing, people's encounters with nature in the Chicago region. The center engages thought leaders from all disciplines, and I have been extremely fortunate to meet some remarkable individuals through this organization. One of the most impressive being our speaker today, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin was a senior scholar with the center addressing the big question, what does Earth ask of us? Her central message was gratitude. Robin describes herself first as a mother, then scientist and writer. She's a distinguished teaching professor of environmental biology at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, New York. Robin is also a founding director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, which creates programs that draw on the wisdom of both indigenous and scientific knowledge for our shared goals of sustainability. We are delighted that Robin is able to join us today. In fact, her flight was canceled last night, but she was able to get in this morning. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And as Jerry mentioned, I would like to begin together with this wonderful group of people with gratitude. For we are showered every day with the gifts of the earth. Think about it when you put your feet on the floor this morning, that you had sweet air to breathe and food on the table, water around you, the companionship of geese overhead, of clouds. We have gratitude for each other and for the privilege of the good work that you are all doing together. Gratitude and celebration for the accomplishments of your remarkable organization. Again, gratitude for all of these beings who are with us, including you human beings here in the room. A remarkable organization, you know, celebrating so many years of incredible work that has made you the envy of conservation organizations all over the country, and a model for cities to aspire to. Leadership in science, in stewardship, in restoration from vacant lots to the tall grass prairie, in bringing the benefits of natural landscapes to people in urban landscapes. You have so much to celebrate, and I'm really proud to be among you today and to learn from your example. And I'm not going to tell you anything today that you don't already know, and that's a good thing. But our ancestors tell us that our job as human people is to remember to remember. And so as we think today about these accomplishments, remember why we are doing this. And when I travel, I always like to be able to acknowledge the First Nations of the place where I am speaking. And it fills my heart to be able to acknowledge my own people here in Chicago, the First Nations of the Potawatomi people for whom this is our homeland. And so I bring you greetings in the Potawatomi language. Bonjour. Shabadaske gish kokwen nadeshnakas. Bodwe wadmi kwenda. Megazedo dem minwa makodo dem. Nin mami kwenda manpiya yan. Miigwech kinigego ga mijong. I don't speak much of our language, but the words that I speak are to tell you who I am, that I am a Potawatomi woman of the Eagle Clan and of the Bears, and how grateful I am to be here. And while I don't speak very much of our language at all, we are told to speak it whenever we can, for it's an endangered species, to bring life to that language. And that language, of course, used to be the language of the Great Lakes. The shores of Lake Michigan rippled with the sound of Bodwe Wadmimwen. Even the place names Chicago, Chicago, is of our language, meaning the big field of wild onions. And our Potawatomi people were canoe people until they made us walk away, until somebody else wanted these forests and prairies, and until we were marched away at gunpoint from everything that we know. We were marched from the Great Lakes to Kansas on what became known as the Trail of Death. And I imagine my many great-grandmother, whose name was Shanoda, trailing her hands over the leaves of her beloved medicine plants as she left them behind, calling a farewell to maples. And it is important that as we celebrate, that we acknowledge this, that we meet today in the lands that hold the memories of another people and their joy in these lands and their grief in losing them. It's important to say this out loud, to make this truth visible, because some of those same forces continue to threaten our open lands today. The stories of the Potawatomi people and the stories of this landscape converge because both were swept away by the same wind. The same forces that tried to exterminate the Potawatomi people are some of the same values and ideas that propel us into what is now recognized as the age of the sixth extinction and to the brink of climate precipice. Two winds, two very different worldviews met on this continent, the indigenous and the industrial. Worldviews which color our relationships to the living land, which shape our answer to the very important question of what does land mean? And the original inhabitants of what are today the Chicago Openlands shared a worldview that was in which land was understood as our sustainer, land as library, land as the source of our identity, our home as sacred, the place of inspirited beings, the source of everything that takes care of us. This worldview in which all living beings were understood as persons and that humans are just one more member of the democracy of species, that view of the earth suddenly encountered another view, a kind of climate change in values. The same forces that give us the answer to the question of what does land mean. The whole notion of land as a set of relationships and indeed a set of responsibilities was replaced by this notion of land as a set of rights. Rights to land as property, rights to land as capital, as natural resources. And so, even though we live together here in a world made of gifts, many of us find ourselves harnessed to economies and to institutions that relentlessly ask, what more can we take from the earth? And on this notable anniversary, we have to celebrate that here is a room full of people who have chosen to ask a different question, to ask instead, what does the earth ask of us? A whole community of people assembled here who know that land is more than a source of belongings, but is where we nurture a sense of belonging. And the challenge is to ensure that the land is a source of belonging for all people. How do we cultivate that sense of belonging for immigrants, for members of urban communities who are often marginalized, who are in the greatest need of the healing benefits of spending time in nature? What does the earth ask of us, or how do we as human people enter into reciprocity with the living world is the question of our time. And my Potawatomi ancestors taught that the job of a human person is to learn that answer, to know what is my gift, what is it that I can give in return for the gifts of the earth. And we all know that in a finite world, we cannot keep taking without replenishment. And we tend to think of our species sometimes, in fact, we almost name ourselves not as citizens, but as consumers, as if we were only takers. And we have to remember that, in fact, we are also givers. The questions of how do we give back are well known in this room. And I want to touch on a few from the Native perspective. In a world that gives us maple syrup and salamanders and sandhill cranes, shouldn't we at least be paying attention? Paying attention is that ongoing act of reciprocity. I think of it as the gift which keeps on giving, in which attention generates wonder, which generates more attention, which generates more joy. Paying attention to the more than human world doesn't lead only to amazement, it also leads to an acknowledgement of pain. Open and attentive, we see and feel equally the beauty and the wounds, the old growth and the clear cut, the mountain as well as the mine. Paying attention to suffering sharpens our ability to respond, that is, to be responsible. And this too is a gift. For when we fall in love with the living world, we cannot be bystanders to its destruction. Attention becomes intention, which coalesces itself to action, as you all know. And deep attention calls us inevitably into deep relationship, where neither partner can be anonymous. We are known, we have names, and knowing a name is the way we humans build relationship, isn't it? It's a sign of respect to call someone by their name, and a sign of disrespect to ignore that. And the Chicago Openlands creates places where we can know each other by name. And ethnobiologists tell us that our great-grandparents knew lots of names. They spoke fluent natural history. They knew the names and personalities of dozens of birds, and it's estimated hundreds of plants. They had to. They were their neighbors. They depended on each other. And they understood that it was those named earth beings who sustain us and not the shopping mall. But we know that today the average American school child can recognize more than 100 corporate logos and fewer than 10 plants. And these include such categories as Christmas tree. As a botanist, I find that deeply hurtful. How can we care for these beings, monitor their well-being, and fight for their existence if we do not even know their names? Is it then a surprise that we've accepted a political system that grants legal personhood to corporations and none for sandhill cranes? Learning the names of plants and animals is a powerful act of support on their behalf. When we learn their names and their gifts, it opens the door to reciprocity. How else do we reciprocate the gifts of the earth? In healing, in restoration, as you know well, restoring the damage that we have done. And I so applaud the work of Chicago Openlands and all of the partners in this wonderful work of restoration, using science and philosophy to make the world whole again. We are tree planters, we are healers, we can be good medicine for the earth. But we need to remember, and I'll tell you that in my work as a restoration ecologist, I almost not stopped doing ecosystem restoration, but I was really mindful of how often we have to do it over and over again, because it's not the land that's broken, it's our relationship to land that is in need of healing. And unless we heal our relationship to land, to one another, and to the earth, the rest is only a Band-Aid. In fact, one of my favorite writers, Gary Nabhan, reminds us that in order to heal our relationship with the land, we need not only ecological restoration, but what he calls restoration, to tell a new story about our relationship to the earth, that we are not consumers from the land, but we are givers to the land. And reciprocity is rooted in the understanding that we are not alone, that the earth is populated by non-human persons to whom we owe not only gratitude but respect. And how different our world would be if we extended the same respect and compassion to other species as we do to human people. Showing respect for the personhood of all beings doesn't mean that we can't use them. We have to, because sadly none of us can photosynthesize. We are all destined by our biology to be consumers. We have to take lives in order to live. And in respect for those lives, it therefore matters how we take them, how we consume, and can we do it in such a way that brings honor to the lives that are taken and honor to the lives that are doing the taking. And the traditional ecological knowledge of our Potawatomi people is rich in the philosophy and practice of how to do that. And I want to close with one such example. Collectively, this indigenous canon of practices and principles that govern this exchange, inevitable exchange of life for life, is known as the honorable harvest. And these are rules of sorts that govern our taking so that the world is as rich for the seventh generation as it is for us. The honorable harvest is a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world. It is an ancient practice, and I submit to you that it is also an urgent practice. And these guidelines of the honorable harvest were actually taught to me by generous elders and teachers in the practice of gathering medicine and gathering berries. But it applies to every single exchange between people and the earth. And the protocol for the honorable harvest is not written down, but if it was, it would look something like this. When you get to the woods to gather medicine or food, you don't just start grabbing everything in sight. We are taught to never take the first plant that we see. Never taking the first means you'll never take the last. And this is, of course, a prescription that has inherent conservation value through cultivation of self-restraint. And then if we do encounter a second plant or a fourth or a fifth, then we ask permission of that plant. I've been taught to address that plant, to introduce myself, to give greetings and thanks, and explain why I need those berries or those roots. Because if you're going to take a life, you have to be personally accountable. And I know in some places, if you began talking to a plant, asking permission to pick the berries, they would call you crazy. But in a worldview that understands those plants as our relatives and as persons, we just call it good manners. It's a two-way conversation, though. If you're going to ask, you have to listen for the answer. And you can listen in different ways. And if the answer is no, you go home. For we remember that they don't belong to us, because taking without permission is also known as stealing. And if you are granted permission, take only what you need and no more. This is a difficult step. In our materialist, really affluence-plagued society, the difference between our wants and our needs are so easily blurred. The Honorable Harvest counsels also that we take in such a way that does the least harm. Don't use a shovel when a digging stick will do, i.e. use appropriate technology. The Honorable Harvest continues that we should use everything that we take. It's disrespectful of the life that is given to waste it. And we have forgotten this, that the easiest way to have what you need is to not waste what you have. Be grateful. Give thanks for what you have received. In an economy which urges you to always want more, the practice of gratitude is truly a radical act. Thankfulness for all that is given makes you feel rich beyond measure, where wealth is having enough to share. Now, gratitude might seem like weak tea given the desperate challenges that lie before us, but I think it is powerful medicine. It's much more than a simple thank you. Gratitude pulls us into relationship with other entities, reminding that our very existence relies on the gifts that they bestow us. And gratitude is humbling. It's an antidote to the arrogance of our time. It reminds us that we are just one member of the democracy of species. It reminds us that the earth does not belong to us. And as we give gratitude to the earth, gratitude in turn guides us toward living in a way that the earth will be grateful for us. The next tenet of the Honorable Harvest is to share it with others, human and non. The earth has shared generously with you, so we model that behavior in return. And a culture of sharing is a culture of resilience that endures the waves of plenty and scarcity, which after all is the way of the world. And to reciprocate the gift. We know that in order for balance to occur, we have to give back. Those of you in this room know that powerfully. Plant gatherers often leave a spiritual gift behind, but also a material gift through the act of weeding, spreading seeds, breaking up rhizomes and planting them, helping the plants move. We give care, we give gratitude, we give ceremony, we give our attention, our respect, fertilizer, restoration, protection, laws. The list is long. What if the precepts of the honorable harvest were the law of the land? What would it look like if a developer poised to convert a meadow to a shopping mall first had to ask permission of the meadowlarks and abide by their answer? What if they were mandated to take only what was needed and give something back in return? Our economies enmesh us all in a profoundly dishonorable harvest, and collectively by assent or inaction, we have chosen the policies that we live by, and we can choose again. We can choose to reciprocate the gift. It's that simple. How do we reciprocate the gifts of the earth? With gratitude, with attention, in ecological restoration to heal the wounds, in fierce defense of the places that we love, with art, with science, with gardens, with planting trees, with children, in ballots, in stories of renewal, in stories of creative resistance, in how we spend our money and our precious lives, and by refusing to be complicit with the forces of ecological destruction. Whatever our gift, we are called to give it on behalf of the earth. And on this wonderful celebration, celebrating the past and looking forward to a brilliant future, let us remember this covenant of reciprocity and seek what our beloved Onondaga clan mother, Audrey Shenandoah, called justice, not only for ourselves, but justice for all creation. Miigwech, meet you.
I would personally want to thank Robin, as well as Madam President Preckwinkle, for being our guests of honor today. I learned many things from Robin when her passion, but one thing I love are new words. Restoration is a word that I'm going to take away from today and work with my kids to help them come up with what their story is about the environment. And the land use that you talked about, Robin, is something that I will take away from this event today. And I think it's something everybody in this room has. We all have our own uses and our own purposes for being here for the land, and hopefully Openlands, and you're seeing that, helps facilitate some of those different things, be it my passion of cycling and being outdoors with my kids, or any of the other passions that you have. So I appreciate everybody joining us today. A couple things to wrap up before we roll out of here. Recycle and reuse. There will be people as you leave, staff members that will be collecting name badges, and we will reuse those. They'll also be collecting any of the envelopes that anybody wants to. Do appreciate everybody's support here today. Appreciate all the volunteers and everybody that helps throughout the year in any which way, either monetarily or through your volunteer hours, and really appreciate the support of Openlands. There are beautiful centerpieces that were provided by A New Leaf. To pick out who gets to take those home, we will go with whoever's birthday is closest to today, and you guys can argue that over amongst each other. So again, on behalf of Openlands and on behalf of BMO, I want to thank you for being here, and have a safe travel.